The night she was unmade began with music gentle enough to sound merciful. Violins drifted through the ballroom like a promise long rehearsed, gliding above the polished floor where candlelight trembled in crystal chandeliers. Every surface gleamed with wealth and assurance, yet beneath the silks and satin gloves there pulsed a hunger for spectacle, for judgment, for the quiet ruin of another's dignity. She stood at the edge of that brilliance, neither guest nor ornament, but an object newly revised by gossip. Her gown was modest dove-gray, chosen for safety rather than admiration, its lace worn thin at the cuffs by years of careful mending. She held herself with the posture taught to girls who must survive on restraint alone, chin level, shoulders still, eyes lowered only when necessary. Once, not long ago, such a stance had drawn approval. Tonight it invited pity, and pity was merely cruelty that had learned to smile. They spoke of her without lowering their voices. It was unnecessary. Polite society excelled at speaking as though one were furniture, present yet irrelevant. She caught fragments carried on the air between bows and curtsies, unfortunate, ill-fated, foolishly trusting. A matron with pearls like frozen tears observed that betrayal refined a woman's character, provided it did not stain the family name. A younger lady whispered that heartbreak was unfashionable this season, and turned away. Only weeks earlier, she had been promised a future that felt secure enough to breathe within. The engagement had been announced with restrained celebration, her fiancé praised for his prudence, she for her gratitude. Her closest friend had stood beside her, fingers entwined, eyes bright with shared secrets. Then came the quiet rearrangement of affections, conducted with smiles and letters written in careful ink. By the time the truth arrived, it did not knock. It simply took its seat and refused to leave. She had learned the details as one learns of a death, too slowly and all at once. The stolen glances, the convenient absences, the engagement dissolved with a tenderness that felt like mockery. Society did not require explanation, it required a scapegoat. The man was forgiven his nature. The friend was admired for her boldness. She was advised to recover gracefully. So she came to the ball because absence would be read as admission. She came because her mother had pressed her gloved hands and reminded her that endurance was a form of virtue. She came because the world had already decided what she was, and she wished, stubbornly, to remain visible. Across the room, her former fiancé laughed, unburdened, his arm offered to another woman who wore triumph like a jewel. That woman met her gaze only once, and the look was not cruel. It was worse. It was satisfied. The heroine felt the room tilt, then steady, as she drew a careful breath and anchored herself to the floor. She would not flee. She would not weep. If she were to be broken, it would be on her feet. The orchestra swelled. Couples turned, skirts flared, and the machinery of elegance resumed its work. She moved when required, nodded when addressed, answered questions with a composure that cost her dearly. Each courtesy was a small battle, each smile a concession. The narrator might have observed that this was how reputations were erased, not with thunder, but with repetition. Then, without announcement, the atmosphere altered. It was subtle at first, a tightening of attention, a collective pause like the intake of breath before a verdict. Conversations thinned. Fans stilled. Even the musicians faltered, then recovered. She sensed it before she saw him, the way one senses a storm before the rain declares itself. He entered without haste, tall and severe, dressed in black cut so precisely it seemed an extension of his will. His presence carried the weight of finality. This was the duke whose estates were spoken of in numbers, and whose temper was spoken of in warnings. He did not bow often. He did not smile without purpose. Men respected him because they feared him, and women feared him because they understood that respect would not save them. He surveyed the room as one might survey a battlefield after victory, with detachment and memory. Greetings reached him and fell away, unanswered or briefly acknowledged. It was said he had little patience for foolishness, less for sentiment, and none at all for weakness. The heroine knew these stories as everyone did, and she felt their gravity press upon her chest. She did not expect his gaze to find her. When it did, it was not lingering in the manner of appraisal, nor dismissive in the manner of contempt. It was intent, unreadable, and entirely focused. For an instant that stretched beyond propriety, the noise receded. She was aware of her own heartbeat, the faint scent of wax and roses, the echo of her own name whispered somewhere behind her. The Duke inclined his head, a gesture so slight it might have been accidental. Yet it landed like a challenge. She responded with a curtsy that was perfectly executed and entirely unguarded. In that exchange, something shifted, not in the room, but within her. The shame that had clung to her all evening loosened its hold, if only by a thread. Around them, society resumed its breath, already reshaping the moment into rumor. She did not know why he had looked at her, or what such attention might cost. She knew only that the night had changed its course. As the music carried on and the chandeliers burned, she stood very still, aware that the most dangerous man in the room had seen her, and had not looked away. She felt, absurdly, that she had crossed an invisible threshold. Whatever came next would not be gentle. It would be watched, weighed, and spoken of for years. Somewhere behind her, whispers began again, sharper now, for the story had found its first true witness and it had teeth at last. Morning light revealed what the ballroom had begun, for scandal never sleeps, it only changes costume. It crept through breakfast tables, carriage windows, and folded notes passed beneath teacups. By noon her name no longer required explanation. Every glance now carried memory of the Duke's attention. She felt it follow her like a second shadow. Even alone, she stood as if observed, breath measured, steps exact, heart quietly braced. Something had been set in motion, and it would not be undone. Society adored momentum more than mercy, and this promised both. It would carry her forward regardless of consent. Alone. She attempted to remain invisible, yet invisibility itself had become impossible. Invitations cooled, conversations shortened, but curiosity bloomed ferociously. At her door appeared a small box wrapped in plain paper, unmarked. It was delivered without ceremony, accepted without witness. Inside lay gloves of dove-gray kid, supple and new. They matched her gown too precisely to be coincidence. No note accompanied them, only silence heavy with intention. Her fingers trembled as she touched the leather. She closed the box, uncertain whether to hide it or treasure it. The decision felt like prophecy disguised as courtesy. It frightened her deeply. Utterly. Completely. That afternoon she was summoned to a musicale, attendance framed as obligation. The drawing room shimmered with polished wood and polite cruelty. She arrived prepared to endure, yet fate preferred spectacle. The Duke stood beside the pianoforte, immovable, listening as if the notes obeyed him. Conversation bent around his silence. When she entered, he turned. Not quickly, not theatrically, but with certainty. He crossed the room and offered his arm. His voice was low, formal, unassailable. "Will you honor me?" Every witness understood the question exceeded music. She placed her hand upon his sleeve. The scandal was immediate, total, absolute. They did not speak while she played, yet communication thrummed between them. The audience listened harder than necessary, seeking cracks. When she finished, applause rose delayed and brittle. The Duke inclined his head, approval given without concession. Later, as refreshments were served, he placed another token upon the table beside her. It was a book, bound in dark leather. No title marked the spine. Inside, a single page bore his handwriting. It contained a line of poetry concerning storms and harbors. She closed it quickly, pulse racing. Across the room, judgment sharpened. This was no longer subtle. Everyone noticed. Everything. By evening the narrative had hardened into accusation. Some called her ambitious, others foolish, a few reckless. No one called her wronged. The Duke did nothing to quiet them. Instead, he invited her to walk the conservatory. Glass walls caught the sunset like fire. Plants breathed damp fragrance into the cooling air. They spoke at last, words carefully chosen. "You are aware of the talk," he said. She nodded. "It cannot harm you unless you allow it." She replied softly, dignity bruised yet intact. "I have little armor left," she admitted. His eyes darkened, not with pity, but resolve. Steel. That night, society sharpened its knives with pleasure. Carriages carried rumors faster than horses. Her mother wept in private, urging caution. Friends withdrew behind courteous smiles. Alone in her chamber, she unwrapped the gloves again. They smelled faintly of cedar and winter. She wondered what price accompanied such attention. Fear threaded itself through gratitude. She had been chosen, but for what purpose? Sleep refused her, offering only rehearsals of disgrace. Somewhere beyond the city, the Duke's estate loomed. It felt nearer than comfort allowed. She sensed that retreat was no longer possible. The path ahead had narrowed. Severely. Unforgivingly. Finally. The following day delivered its boldest stroke. A formal letter arrived bearing the Duke's seal. It requested her presence at his estate. No explanation followed, no apology, no delay. Her hands shook as she read it. This was not invitation but summons. The world would interpret acceptance as ambition. Refusal would be read as confession of guilt. She stood at the window, weighing futures like fragile glass. At last she folded the letter carefully. Her reflection watched her, pale but resolved. She would go, not to be rescued, but to know. Whatever awaited her, uncertainty was worse. Decidedly. Truly. Absolutely. Preparations were quiet, efficient, stripped of romance. She dressed in restraint, choosing simplicity as shield. The carriage ride stretched through gray countryside. Each mile felt like consent renewed. When the estate emerged, stone against sky, she inhaled sharply. It was vast, disciplined, unwelcoming. A footman escorted her without comment. Inside, silence ruled like law. The Duke awaited her in a room lined with maps. He did not rise immediately. Power here did not hurry. He gestured for her to sit. Her courage steadied. She realized the scandal had only been the beginning. Something far greater was unfolding. Quietly, inexorably, irrevocably. He studied her as one studies weather, assessing endurance. "You have been placed at the center of a story," he said. She answered honestly, voice steady. "I did not choose it." "No," he replied, "but you endure it. That quality interests me." He rose then, closing distance deliberately. The air thickened with unspoken terms. "This association will cost you," he continued. "It may cost you peace." She met his gaze, fear and pride entwined. "I have already paid dearly," she said. Silence answered, heavy but not unkind. In that stillness, possibility sharpened. Dangerous. Compelling. Unavoidable. Real. Present. Alive. Air. When she departed the estate, dusk clung to the hills. No promises had been spoken, yet none were needed. The carriage carried her back altered. By nightfall, whispers would ignite anew. She understood now that the Duke's attention was not charity. It was intention, sharpened and patient. Society would soon demand explanation. So would her own heart. As the carriage wheels turned, fear returned, tempered by resolve. She had stepped beyond salvage into consequence. Whatever awaited her, retreat was impossible. The scandal had found its teeth. And somewhere in the darkening distance, the Duke was watching. The game had begun. Rain stitched the windows with silver threads as night gathered around the Duke's estate, turning stone corridors into chambers of breath and echo. She was led once more into the room where maps lined the walls, though now a fire burned low, casting amber light that softened severity without erasing it. The Duke dismissed the servants with a gesture that brooked no delay. Silence settled, intimate and alert. She stood, gloved hands folded, pulse measured against the hush, aware that this meeting would ask something irrevocable of them both. He did not begin with courtesy. "You understand why you are here," he said, voice even, eyes fixed not upon her face but her posture, as if gauging a structure for hidden faults. She answered without apology. "I understand the rumors have made me useful." The admission surprised them both. He looked up then, the smallest lift of his brow acknowledging courage. "Useful is a word society uses when it wishes to avoid honesty," he replied. I prefer precision. He paced once, boots quiet on the rug. I have been accused of cruelty, he continued. It is not untrue. I am decisive, and decisiveness wounds those who expect indulgence. She absorbed this without flinching. I have been accused of weakness, she said. It is not untrue. I trusted, and trust exposes the ribs. The fire popped softly, punctuating confession. Their words did not clash. They aligned like matched blades, different weights, similar purpose. He stopped before the hearth. I did not seek you to rescue you, he said. Rescue presumes helplessness. I sought you because you endured disgrace without forfeiting dignity. Her breath caught, not at the praise but the accuracy. Few had seen her so clearly. Endurance, she replied, is not a virtue when it is the only option. He inclined his head. Agreed. That is why choice must enter. She shifted, the gloves whispering as her fingers tightened. And the cost? She asked. Society never offers choice without a ledger. He met her gaze fully now, and the weight of it steadied her. The cost is scrutiny sharpened into permanence, he said. You will be measured against me. Every silence interpreted, every kindness misnamed. She nodded, the future assembling itself like weather. And you? She asked. What do you pay? His mouth thinned, then softened. Peace, he answered. But peace has been a stranger to me for years. The firelight warmed her cheek as she spoke again. I fear being chosen as a statement, she said. I fear becoming proof of your power rather than partner to your purpose. The words, once spoken, could not be reclaimed. He did not recoil. Instead, he stepped closer, stopping well within the bounds of propriety yet never crossing it. If I wished for proof, he said quietly, I would choose easier evidence. You complicate me. The admission hung between them, fragile and potent. Outside, rain intensified, drumming the glass with insistence. She felt the echo within her chest. I am afraid, she said simply. Not of you, but of believing again. He considered this, then reached for the book he had given her, now resting on the table. Opening it, he revealed another page, blank. This, he said, offering it to her, is where belief begins when certainty is dishonest. She took the book, fingertips brushing leather. The contact sparked and receded, leaving intention behind. He spoke again, slower now. I will not promise affection, he said. Affection grows wild or not at all. I will promise regard, protection of your name, and a public stand that cannot be retracted. Her heart stumbled. Marriage, she said, testing the word. He did not deny it. In time, he replied. Only if you choose it with eyes open. She closed the book, holding it to her breast as if it could steady her thoughts. A memory surfaced unbidden, the ballroom, the whispers, the satisfaction on another woman's face. She lifted her chin. If I accept your protection, she said, I will not be hidden. I will not be softened into silence. His gaze sharpened with something like approval. Nor would I allow it, he said. Visibility is the point. When society wounds in shadows, the cure must be light. They stood then, the distance between them charged yet chaste. She realized she was no longer pleading to be spared, but negotiating to be seen. The shift surprised her, a quiet recalibration of self. I need time, she said. Not to decide my worth, but to decide my courage. He inclined his head again, a formal acknowledgment that felt like respect. Take it, he said. I will not hurry you. As if summoned by the hour, a clock chimed elsewhere in the house. The sound threaded finality through the room. He offered his arm, not to command, but to accompany her to the door. She accepted, aware of the eyes that would soon invent meanings. At the threshold, he paused. When you are ready, he said, voice low enough to be private, I will stand where it matters. She looked back once, rainlight glimmering in her eyes. The world beyond waited to judge. Inside her, a decision began to breathe, dangerous and alive, demanding a future bold enough to meet it. She stepped into the corridor, the air cooler, sharper, carrying the promise of exposure. Servants bowed, eyes carefully blank, yet she felt the story already rewriting itself around her steps. Outside, the rain eased, leaving the stones slick and reflective, as though the night wished to remember her passing. In the carriage, she opened the book again and traced the blank page, imagining ink, imagining consequence. The Duke's restraint weighed heavier than pursuit. It honored her fear without feeding it. As wheels turned, resolve gathered like a tide. By morning, whispers would demand answers. She would have none yet. But she knew this. When the question finally came, it would not ask if she was afraid. It would ask whether she would be seen. The assembly hall glittered beneath 100 chandeliers, each flame trembling as if aware that reputations were about to be weighed. Silk skirts whispered, boots polished the marble, and the air held the charged sweetness of anticipation sharpened by malice. She entered alone, spine straight, breath steady, carrying her name like a fragile heirloom already chipped by rumor. Eyes turned not in welcome but appraisal, calculating what disgrace had done to her value. At the far end, the Duke stood immovable, dark against gold, presence commanding silence without demanding it. Her former fiancé lingered nearby, laughter easy, arm offered to the woman who had replaced her with practiced grace. That woman's smile flickered once toward her, triumphant yet cautious, as though victory still required witnesses. The orchestra softened, conversations ebbed, and society leaned forward, scenting a moment worthy of memory. She felt the old shame stir, then settle, mastered by a steadier resolve earned through sleepless nights. If she must be seen, she would be seen standing. A murmur rippled when the Duke moved, crossing the hall with deliberate restraint, neither hurried nor hesitant. He stopped before her, the space between them narrowing until etiquette itself seemed to hold its breath. His voice, when it came, was calm enough to bruise. He addressed the room first, acknowledging rank and title with precision that sounded like courtesy and felt like command. Then he turned fully to her, gaze unwavering. The silence sharpened as he took her hand, not lifting it yet, allowing the contact to be undeniable. Gasps scattered like startled birds, quickly subdued. She felt heat rise to her cheeks but did not withdraw, anchoring herself in the weight of his grip. He spoke her name clearly, restoring it to the room. In that utterance, something long damaged straightened. "You have judged her," he said, voice carrying without strain, "and found her wanting by standards unworthy of her endurance." The accusation landed softly, devastating in its restraint. He tightened his hold, a subtle promise. "I did not come to be entertained," he continued, "but to be clear." Her former fiancé stiffened, color draining. The Duke turned then, addressing the assembly as one addresses history, with intention rather than appeal. "You may forget her," he said, "you may doubt her, and you may speak her name with careless cruelty." Each clause struck like measured blows. "But know this," he finished, voice lowering, "she is my wife." The word reverberated, irrevocable. The hall erupted, not in noise but shock, a collective recalibration of power and narrative. She stood very still, heart racing, mind clearing. Marriage had been named, not negotiated, transforming her from object to axis. Whispers scrambled to survive the new truth. The woman who had betrayed her looked away first. The Duke released her hand only long enough to offer his arm, an invitation now transformed into certainty. She accepted, aware that acceptance no longer diminished her. They moved through the stunned assembly together, equal parts shield and statement. Outside, night pressed against the doors, waiting. Inside her chest, fear loosened, replaced by resolve sharpened through choice. Carriages would soon carry this declaration into every corner of the city. By morning, her name would be spoken differently, not kindly perhaps, but carefully. She understood that the Duke's promise was not safety, but visibility without retreat. He leaned close, voice meant only for her. "There will be consequences," he murmured. She met his gaze, unflinching, and answered with quiet certainty. "Let them come." Applause began somewhere uncertain, spreading as courage often does, borrowed then owned. The Duke inclined his head once more, acknowledgment offered to her alone. As they crossed the threshold together, she felt the weight of the future settle, heavy but chosen. Beyond the doors, rain had returned, washing the steps until reflections fractured and reformed. Servants waited, eyes lowered, already aware they were witnessing history rehearsed into permanence. He paused, considering the watching world, then guided her forward. The doors closed behind them with deliberate finality. In the antechamber, lamplight softened edges, granting them a moment stolen from scrutiny. She released a breath she had not known she held. He did not speak immediately, honoring the gravity of what he had declared. When he did, it was softer. "You will be questioned," he said, "and so will I." She nodded, strength settling into her bones. "I will answer honestly," she replied, without apology. A faint smile touched his mouth, brief and private. "That," he said, "is all I require." They stood then, not touching, bound by something newly forged. Outside, voices swelled again, demanding explanation, demanding access. The Duke straightened, the public man returning like armor. He offered her his arm once more, questionless. She accepted, knowing the next steps would be measured in sacrifice. Together they prepared to face the reckoning he had summoned. Yet beneath resolve, uncertainty stirred, quiet and insistent. She wondered what shape marriage would take under constant gaze. He wondered whether his declaration had merely shifted the battlefield. Neither voiced these doubts. Silence, once enemy, became ally. They stepped forward together as the doors reopened, faces composed. The crowd surged, questions forming like waves. He lifted a hand, halting them with practiced authority. "In due time," he said, granting nothing further. Her heart steadied, trusting his restraint. As they descended the steps, flash of lanterns caught rain and faces alike. The declaration echoed anew with every look. She realized the true resolution had not yet arrived. It waited beyond ceremony, beyond applause. Tonight had only redrawn the map. The Duke leaned closer as the carriage approached. "This will test us," he said quietly. She answered without hesitation, eyes forward. "I am done being hidden." He nodded, a decision settling deeper. The carriage door opened, revealing a path lit by uncertainty. She stepped inside, aware that courage would soon demand proof. Behind them, the crowd murmured, unsatisfied. Ahead, the night waited, patient and exacting. What marriage required remained unanswered, suspended between promise and peril. Dawn arrived without spectacle, pale and deliberate, as though aware that endings required gentleness. The estate woke slowly, corridors breathing with muted footsteps, curtains stirring like restrained thoughts. She stood at the window, watching light climb the gardens, feeling the unfamiliar quiet of a future not yet judged. Marriage had been declared, not consummated by vows or celebration, but by will. The weight of it settled differently now, less like a verdict and more like a responsibility shared. She turned as the Duke entered, his presence no longer startling, simply constant. They faced one another without ceremony. The night before had been armor. Morning demanded truth. "I will not pretend this binds us neatly," he said, voice low, unadorned. "It binds us publicly." She nodded, appreciating the honesty. "Public bonds are the ones I fear least," she replied. "It is the private silences that undo people." He considered her, then gestured toward the chair opposite the hearth. They sat, distance measured but intentional, learning the geometry of partnership. Days unfolded under scrutiny sharpened by fascination. Letters arrived thick with opinion, some congratulatory, others warning, many speculative. She read them all, refusing the old instinct to shield herself from discomfort. He watched her strength recalibrate, admired without comment. Together they appeared when required, composed and deliberate, denying scandal its appetite for fracture. Yet at night, when the house grew still, doubts crept closer, testing the seams of their resolve. One evening, a letter arrived bearing a familiar hand. Her former fiancé requested an audience, citing closure with performative humility. She felt the old tremor stir, then subside. "I will see him," she said. The Duke did not object. "I will remain," he replied. "Not as guard, but witness." The meeting occurred in the same room where intentions had first been spoken. The man entered smaller than memory allowed, confidence eroded by consequence. Apologies were offered, carefully framed. She listened without interruption, then answered calmly. "You mistook possession for affection," she said. "I release you from both." Silence followed, profound and cleansing. When he left, relief settled like breath restored. That night, she walked the gardens alone, moonlight tracing paths she had not yet claimed. The Duke joined her without sound. "You chose mercy," he observed. "I chose freedom," she corrected. He smiled then, not briefly, not guarded, but fully, as if something long restrained had finally been permitted expression. The sight startled her more than any declaration. "You are braver than you know," he said. She met his gaze. "So are you," she replied. They stood amid roses heavy with dew, no longer strangers negotiating power, but companions learning trust. Time, relentless and fair, did its work. They learned each other's rhythms, the Duke's precision softened by patience, her vigilance eased by reliability. Affection did not arrive as lightning, but as warmth accumulating, undeniable in its steadiness. When they spoke of marriage again, it was quieter, truer. Vows were exchanged with witnesses chosen for loyalty rather than rank. The ceremony lacked excess, yet carried gravity. She did not feel rescued. She felt recognized. Society adjusted, as it always did, reshaping its narratives to preserve itself. Some praised the union as brilliant, others criticized its defiance, but none ignored it. She became visible not as spectacle, but as presence. Where once she had been discussed, now she was addressed. The shift was subtle, profound. Power, she learned, need not announce itself loudly when it stood with integrity. One afternoon, she received a letter from the woman who had betrayed her, words awkward and sincere, acknowledging harm without excuse. She read it once, then placed it in the fire. Forgiveness, she understood, did not require correspondence. Healing was not an exchange, but a release. The Duke watched the flame consume paper, saying nothing, respecting the sanctity of her choice. Years later, whispers softened into memory. The story endured, retold with embellishment, yet anchored by truth. A woman betrayed, forgotten, afraid, who chose visibility over silence. A duke feared for his severity, who learned that strength could shelter rather than dominate. Together they altered the map, not by conquest, but by standing firm when retreat would have been easier. On an autumn morning, they traveled beyond the estate, carriage wheels echoing across fields burnished gold. She rested against him, not independence, but ease. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly, meaning everything at once. He considered, then answered with certainty. "No. Fear taught me caution. You taught me courage." She smiled, the past no longer sharp. As the carriage disappeared into mist, the world continued its restless turning, unaware that somewhere dignity had been reclaimed without spectacle. Their legacy was not perfection, but proof that healing could follow declaration, that love could emerge not from rescue, but from recognition freely given. And though challenges would come, as they always did, they would meet them openly, no longer afraid to be seen.